What's up, everyone? Welcome to Bilbrons and Dragons. I'm your host, Bilbron Bafflestone. So today we're having another episode of my Deep Dive series. Today looking at the spell Infernal Calling. And I'm very excited about this one, because I've been meaning to do it as a companion piece to my deep dive on Summon Greater Demon, which I think is one of my best videos, so check it out. The link will be in the description below. And I've always thought of this spell as, a reflection of Summon Greater Demon, and I've really wanted to get into it. So, without further ado, let's break this down. So, Infernal Calling is available only to Warlocks and Wizards, and I guess Bards through Magical Secrets. The main problem for Wizards is that they're going to have a tough time using Infernal Calling without significant investment, because it interacts with charisma skills, and wizards don't usually have good charisma skills. They're going to somehow have to get expertise to make it work well, unless they have a devil's talisman, of course. Now, warlocks do have excellent synergies with this spell since they are charisma based, and they can squeeze in skill expert as a half feat to get a higher charisma and get that expertise on intimidation, persuasion, or deception. And do note that it might seem at first that Pact of the Talisman might be able to help you on that check. It doesn't really, because technically one can't fail or succeed on a contested check. The spell is unaffected by silvery barbs for the same reason. Now, of course, this is up to your DM, and this might be an overly strict reading of the rules as written, but it's definitely something to talk to your DM about. Technically, it doesn't work. Now, Warlocks do have access to Cloak of Flies, and that will give advantage to any of your intimidation checks. So they can virtually always win the check if you pair it with intimidation expertise, and that also leaves the true name unrevealed so that you can bargain with it later, as we'll talk about. Warlocks also have access to Devil Sight, like devils do, and that offers some possible combat synergies, although of course Darkness is a concentration spell, as is Infernal Calling, so it would have to come from someone other than yourself. So to a degree, Infernal Calling is appropriate for Warlocks. But the main problem for Warlocks is that they can't upcast it. Their pack slots max out at 5th level, so they can't ever get higher CR Devils, except for one if they have a Devil's Talisman, which again we'll talk about here in a few minutes. Honestly, the best class for Infernal Calling might just be Bards, picking it up with Magical Secrets, because they are charisma based and they have built-in expertise and often like a lot of bonuses to their charisma based skill checks. And they get the higher level slots necessary to upcast it, so that could be intriguing. Probably Bards are the best to use Infernal Calling. However, one thing that you have to be aware of is the role-playing issues involved with trucking with evil fiends and devils and such. It really does have an impact on the table role-playing wise. In this Westmarch server that I'm in, it has definitely caused some issues, and I've been requested to not cast it, and even when I do cast it, people bitch about it. And I definitely recall in my table game that I played a couple years back that the DM banned Summon Greater Demon and Infernal Calling because of the role-playing issues. So be aware, it's not really role-playing appropriate for good PCs in the eyes of a lot of players. A lot of your DMs and allies are going to have role-playing issues with it, even if the caster is not good. And honestly, personally, I don't see why it's a problem for good characters to do that. I mean, they're binding evil creatures and forcing them to do good things, so I don't necessarily see that as evil, but a lot of players are going to have a problem with it. In terms of deploying Infernal Calling, we have to be aware that it's not a combat cast. It takes 1 minute casting time, so it's a pre-buff spell only, unless of course you have a spell gem of high enough level, which actually is a pretty fantastic item to acquire if you're using Infernal Calling. Being able to bust it out as an action would be pretty sweet. And it does require sight to place the devil, although of course that's not usually an issue out of combat. But that right away means that it's not competing with Summon Greater Demon or any of the Tasha's summons or any other combat summon, because it's a precast, and that's an important role. In a lot of battles, you're going to be able to precast, especially if the duration of the precast is 1 hour. And in that role, I think it's pretty good. If you're precasting a summon, you're generally going to want to send it out ahead of the rest of the party to draw out attacks from any hostile creatures that might be there. It's got Devil Sight, so it's not going to need a light and call attention to itself. and they are pretty tough. Most devils do pretty good in the AC, hit point, and resistance department, so they'll be able to tank a lot of damage while the rest of the team is getting into position. That makes it different from Summon Greater Demon, which is a combat cast, but you can't precast it. So I don't see these spells as competing with each other. I think they're very complementary, and on my current evil PC, I like having both. So let's talk about controlling these things, because it does take some planning and some investment. Control of the devil is based on a charisma check contest. It's the caster's intimidation, persuasion, or deception versus the devil's insight. Now note that this is unaffected by the devil's magic resistance, unlike the control mechanic for Summon Greater Demon, which is based on charisma saves. With Infernal Calling, all devils have magic resistance, but it does not affect the control of it. So obviously having a really high charisma check is going to be necessary to use this spell. I definitely recommend not using it unless you have expertise in one of those, and having the Warlock Cloak of Flies for advantage on intimidation would also be very helpful. But note that you can further buff the roll with guidance through, obviously another player since it's concentration, or bardic inspiration, or flashes of genius. All of those things will apply to the check and can get you a really strong advantage. Now note that if you have the true name of the devil, then the commands get advantage on the check. However, that only applies to the second and further checks. The first check does not gain that benefit. And by forcing them to reveal the true name, that takes away some of your bargaining power later, as I'll discuss. I should also point out that I've had some resistance from some DMs on my West March server as to whether this is even possible. Some of them think that the true name should be much more difficult to acquire, and that these devils have spent a lot of time figuring out how to resist commands to reveal it. I personally don't agree, since there's nothing about that in the rules as written, but it should be kept in mind. You definitely got to talk to your DM and the other players at the table before rolling out Infernal Calling. Now, the dangers of the devil breaking caster control are significant. It sticks around for 3d6 minutes, on average 10 minutes after you drop concentration if it's uncontrolled. And the devil will almost certainly attempt to sabotage the caster. It is hostile to the caster and has total autonomy over its choice of actions. Unlike uncontrolled demons from Summon Greater Demon, those are required rules as written to attack the nearest non-demon, so the dangers of them losing control or being uncontrolled when you drop concentration are much less. Plus it only sticks around for 1d6 rounds. Unlike 10 minutes. That's a pretty long time to be hanging around, and the devil definitely has it out for the caster and is going to try and undermine or sabotage or straight out attack in some way. Now, I will point out that if you really parse the description of the rules as written, that might not be the case if the caster is already evil. It does say that they will obey willingly if it draws the caster towards evil, and then when uncontrolled will tempt casters towards evil acts. So personally, the context of that to me makes it seem like they will obey voluntarily. I think that they would voluntarily obey an evil caster. This is obviously up to the DM, and he might not want to give a PC such an easy ride, but I do think it is implied by the language. Now, we do need to note that control is guaranteed if the caster possesses the correct Devil's Talisman. It also allows for a +1 bump to the CR of the type of devil that you can get. This is the only way for a Warlock to get a Black Abishai, which is a CR 7 creature, and it's the only way for a Wizard to get a Horned Devil, which is a CR 11 creature. The problem is that talismans are almost impossible to acquire. They're not found on any of the magic item tables, and they are very difficult to create personally. There really isn't a defined way to create them, so you're going to have to get some sort of recipe or directions from the DM. And all we know is it involves bathing in the blood of a worthy sacrifice of a loved one. That's a pretty high bar, and you're going to have to be pretty evil to sacrifice a loved one and bathe in their blood. So as I see it, to get a Devil's Talisman, you're basically going to have to be gifted one by the DM. And yeah, good luck with that. So anyway, you want to be able to win control of the devil. It's a charisma-based thing, unless you have the talisman. And you're definitely going to need to buff up your charisma-based skills, try and play around with the true name, and be aware that the dangers of it breaking control are significant. However, you can set all of those things up. And if you do, Infernal Calling is actually a more controllable pre-buff cast than even Conjure Elemental. Because as long as it hasn't broken control, it will disappear when you drop your concentration. Unlike Elementals or Fae or some other spells in the summoning department, those don't disappear and are hostile to you when you break your concentration no matter what. As long as you've got control of that devil, you're in pretty good shape if you lose your concentration. Furthermore, control of the devil lasts until the commanded task is complete. Remember, Summon Greater Demon allows a save every round. So control of devils is much tighter than control of demons, unless your save DC is super high, right? At least 20 for a Barlgura, 21 for a Chasme. Again, we gotta remember they play much different roles in the spell loadout. Summon Greater Demon is a combat cast. You'll be lucky for it to last one battle. Infernal Calling is a pre-buff that's going to last for the whole 1 hour duration, presuming you've invested in winning the control of it. And if you're a Warlock using it, there's some interesting synergy with Extend Spell and Sanctuary Vessel if you're a Genie Lock, because you can throw out a devil from Infernal Calling and then get the slot back on a short rest. That's pretty sweet and something I take advantage of on my own Warlock. Do note that Catnap doesn't work with this because that forces the caster to sleep and that forces you to drop concentration, of course, but you can do it with a 2 hour duration and a 1 hour short rest, or a 1 hour duration and a 10-minute short rest from Sanctuary Vessel. So yeah, they play completely different roles and they don't compete with each other. Personally, I like having both. A good evil caster should have both. Now, when you're giving it tasks, and remember that it will carry out the task until its completion, you can, for example, say, "You will guard me and my allies as we travel, destroying all of our enemies while never acting against us." This to me is a pretty workable general order, even if the DM deems this to be two separate orders. And remember, you don't want to get too fancy. DMs do tend to get pedantic with this sort of thing, so word your orders carefully. And also note that devils can make side deals, and by lore they are amenable to making side deals. It's even written in the monster manual that they can't break contracts without risking destruction by Asmodeus. So, as a sample offer, I've had some success with this one. If you agree to follow my commands willingly and without attempts to subvert them, I will agree to not command you to reveal your true name. Nor will I make a devil's talisman from it and make you my puppet until I tire of you. Do you agree, or will my next command be that you shout your true name repeatedly in battle while my magic binds you? Because I have Cloak of Flies and I can get this check at advantage without getting the true name, I feel like that's a pretty compelling offer, and so far every devil has gone for it. Also keep in mind that soul coins are an item, and they are the literal currency in the 9 hells, so if you have soul coins, you can probably talk demons into working for those. So that's what you need to do to get Infernal Calling rolling and a devil into the field. You need to win the control check, and then you have to get a properly worded command so that it does what you want it to. But if you do, devils can be pretty solid. They are stronger straight combatants than demons or Tasha-style summons. We'll talk about that when we look at the spreadsheet. But typically they have a stronger armor class, hit points, and attacks. The White and Black Abishai both even get magical attacks, unlike any demons that are available through Summon Greater Demon. And they all come with much better resistances. They all get resistance to cold and unsilvered non-magical bludgeoning, piercing, slashing. They all get fire, poison, and poisoned immunity. White Abishai throw cold immunity into that. Black Abishai throw acid immunity into that. They all come with magic resistance. They are pretty durable, and so I found that most of the value of my summons comes from them tanking, and a lot of the times if they get blown away in one round, it's not optimal. And devils are definitely really durable. Like if you throw a barbed devil out there, it's going to tank really well for you. They also all come with Devil Sight, so that's excellent to combo with the darkness spell from an ally, or if you've offloaded it to your familiar through various means, or if you're using the Black Abishai, which has a creeping darkness ability, which is basically darkness that it can move around. That can be a pretty cool thing to set up. But the problem with devils to me is that they lack the special abilities that most demons come with. I mean, if you look at the slate of demons like Babao and Chasme and Vrox and stuff, they have really, really good innate spells and special abilities. Whereas devils don't really. They are mostly just about tanking and doing damage with weapons and stuff. There's also not that many viable options relative to Summon Greater Demon. And of course, that's assuming no Devil's Talisman. I mean, if you have a talisman, any devil is good. But some of them have pretty high insight, and you don't want to risk a check against them. Now, for a Warlock, only the Barbed Devil and White Abishai are viable. Other options are like too weak, or they're too high CR, and so having only 2 available options is kind of lame. But that said, they are pretty excellent. I personally favor the White Abishai because it has reckless attack and has a pretty strong DPR, and it has a fly speed, which is fantastic, and it has magical attacks, which is fantastic. However, it's not nearly as durable as a Barbed Devil, which is just excellent at soaking damage. It has like 115 hit points and pretty strong AC and great resistances, but its DPR isn't great. Definitely a downgrade from the White Abishai, and it's a downgrade from the Tasha's summons as well. The Tasha's summons tend to be pretty strong in the DPR department and light in the durability department, unlike these classic summons. For a wizard, I think only the White Abishai and the Chain Devil really make sense. The other options are too hard to control, except for the Orthon, and it's totally not worth a 9th level slot, even though it is a strong infiltrator tracker if you do summon one. It's got invisibility and like this tracking thing on its crossbow. In fact, let's go over to the spreadsheet that I made and talk a little bit more in detail about these devils. So as you can see, I've made a spreadsheet. I will link the spreadsheet in the video description below, as well as the script for this, so you can reference it at your pleasure. And I started the list with Barbed Devil and White Abishai. There are a few lower CR devils like the Bearded Devil and the Maragon, but why would you summon those when you can summon a Barbed Devil or a White Abishai? They're way more powerful, and the White Abishai doesn't have an amazing insight, so is one of the more controllable ones. So we see the Barbed Devil is super durable, AC 15, 116 hit points, great resistances and immunities. It's got that barbed hide, so it's hard to grapple with, but it doesn't do much damage. Keep in mind that the Tasha summons are going to do between like 18 and 20 damage on a regular hit and like 26 to 28 on an advantage hit. The Barbed Devil is pretty bad by that standard. It is nice that it does have a ranged option, and it's actually pretty high damage, even though it's fire. But still, it doesn't come up to the par of Tasha's summons, and it's not as good as the White Abishai. We see the White Abishai has pretty solid DPR, comparable to a Tasha's summon with its Reckless and Reprisal, but it's way more durable than any Tasha's summons. It's got more hit points, and it's got amazing resistances, and it can fly, and it has double sight. So those are all pretty good. As a Warlock, I've been using the White Abishai, and it's been pretty solid for me. Now, the Black Abishai is totally better. A Warlock could get that if it has its Talisman, and a Wizard could get it with a 6th level spell. And that one's pretty good too. Again, it has magical damage. It has decent DPR output, especially since it's going to be attacking at advantage with double sight plus creeping darkness. And it can fly, and it still has great resistances, although it has the lowest hit points of any devil option. The Chain Devil is a really good one, however. That one calls for a 7th level slot out of a Wizard or a Bard. But man, it's good. AC 16 and 85 hit points with all of those resistances and immunities, so it's super resistant to damage. And it has that crazy chain thing, man. It can get 6 chains out there doing mega damage, as we see, and restraining. Oh wow, that is so good. If you're a Bard, investing in magical secrets in being able to summon Chain Devils might make a lot of sense. And even a Wizard might be able to risk it if it's a build that has invested in a good check and it's only versus Insight +1. Chain Devil to me is the real star of this list. Then you can get Bone Devils, which are pretty solid. I mean, really great AC and hit points, great resistances, decent damage, although not nearly as good if the enemy is resistant or immune to poison. The problem is that it's an 8th level spell, and it's an Insight +6 on the check. Man, that's pretty risky. Even if you've invested and have a good roll at advantage, the Bone Devil is not the sort of thing that you're going to want to fight like 5% of the time even. I probably wouldn't risk it unless you're like a really good Bard that has something like, one of their abilities where they never roll less than a 15 or something. Next we have the Orthon, which is the highest that you can cast without a talisman. And that one's pretty solid. Insight +2 only, so pretty easy to control. It has good hit points, good AC, good resistances, and pretty amazing powers out of the bow. It has a range of 6 really good powers that it can choose. It is definitely the most versatile of the devils because it adds all of those special abilities. It's just, man, 9th level slot? That is a huge investment for an Orthon. I don't know if I would do it, but if you do, it'll at least do something. It's not that horrible. Now finally you can get a Horn Devil, and this is going to cost a 9th level slot and the talisman. You can only get it with the talisman, but that means it can't ever break control. It has to obey your commands. And if you can get them, they're not that great. I mean, for a 9th level slot, it's got good movement, good AC, good hit points, but not magical damage. The DPR is not amazing. I feel like you could do better with a 9th level slot. So that's it. That's my look at Infernal Calling, which I think is a pretty cool spell. It's a little bit limited in the types of devils that you can get. It's a little bit annoying in how you have to set up for it and invest for it. But if you do, it can be a solid contributor. Having a devil to throw out there to tank for you and to help you in battle can be a very good thing. Anyway, let me know what you think about the spell in the comments. And regardless, thank you so much for watching. This has been Build Bronze and Dragons. I'm your host, Bill Bafflestone. See you next time.